Airing first on Asheville FM, WSFM LP 103.3 in Asheville, this is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Salagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world.
This week, we're sharing two segments. First up, Lorenzo Komb'oa Ervin talks about attempts in the 1970s at building a prisoners' union in the United States and parallels with the inside-outside organizing in the USA today. Lorenzo is an author, black anarchist, organizer, former Black Panther, and former political prisoner based in Kansas City, Missouri. In this segment, he also talks a bit about the ideas of George Jackson, Martin Sostre, and others. Following that, we'll hear a short message written by Jonina Abron Ervin, an autonomous organizer and also former Black Panther who is married to Lorenzo, about a specific request for solidarity to help these elders weather the pandemic and lighten the load of mutual aid in their community that we will share details of in the show notes also. Finally, we will hear from Ohio death row prisoner from the Lucasville Uprising case, Bomani Shakur, a.k.a. Keith Lamar. Bomani called us yesterday, April 29th, from death row at OSP Youngstown in Ohio. He's accused of crimes related to the 1993 Lucasville Uprising, which he claims innocence of, and has an execution date set for November 16th, 2023. For a little over an hour, we speak about his upbringing, his case, injustices in white supremacist and capitalist America, Bomani's politicization and struggle to find himself, defend his dignity and his life. The interview is being released on the last day of the Month of Solidarity and Direct Action with Bomani Shakur. Big thanks to Revolutionary Abolitionist Movement of NYC for hooking up this chat. More on his case can be found at keithlamar.org, on the Facebook page Justice for Keith Lamar, and at the Twitter account Free Keith Lamar. On his website, you can find a link to his book, Condemned, ways to donate to his phone fund, and a link to the excellent 35-minute documentary on YouTube about his case called Condemned. If you're on Twitter, there is a Twitter storm planned for April 30th, 2020, which is today when I'm releasing this. You can find it on our Twitter or at Free Keith Lamar. And now a brief announcement from the comrades at the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, of which we are a member.
COVID-19 has exposed the many failings of states around the globe. Millions have lost their jobs, leaving many unable to pay rent and in danger of eviction. In response, tenants around the world organized rent strikes for April 1. As the crisis continues, even more people will fall short of rent. More rent strikes will begin May 1 and maybe even June 1. If you're worried about making rent now or in the future, it's time to get organized. Reach out to your neighbors, find your local tenants union, and let the landlords know you won't be paying rent. Then fly a white sheet from your window to spread the message. Channel Zero Network podcasts have put out several episodes on tenant struggles surrounding COVID-19. Check out Rebel Steps' emergency rent strike episode for ways to get started. It's Going Down's episode This is America, number 111 and 112 for interviews with organizers, and the Final Straws episode Doing for Selves to hear from Tenants United in Chicago, and Crime Thinks, the Ex-Worker podcast, episode 75, for an overview of rent strike tactics and history. Even though we don't know what the future holds, we do know that stronger communities are the way to ensure a better world for all of us. We can build those communities one person at a time, building by building, block by block. Be ready to join the movement on May 1.
And now a few brief prison-related announcements. First up, there's a phone zap about COVID-19 in North Carolina prisons starting today. From the post from Blue Ridge ABC's website, brabc.blackblogs.org. Over the past month, COVID-19 has blazed through North Carolina prisons like wildfire. Across DPS facilities, over 600 people have tested positive, roughly the same number of cases in all of Wayne County, which has a population that is 3 times larger. One person at Pender CI has already died of complications, and a single facility, Noose CI, has a mind-boggling 466 positive cases. The reason Noose has so many confirmed cases is that DPS decided to test everyone there, and they should do the same at all facilities with significant numbers of positive cases, such as NCCI Women, where 81 people have tested positive so far. This is the only way to know the full scale of the outbreak and to be able to take appropriate measures to mitigate further spread. Please call the Commissioner of Prisons, Todd Ishii, on Thursday, April 30th and beyond to demand universal testing at 4 hard-hit prisons. Todd Ishii can be reached as the Commissioner of Prisons at 919-838-4000. Also at his house at 330-544-4425. You can email Todd Ishii at todd.ishee@ncdps.gov. There's a suggested script for use available at the BRABC website. Next up, word is now coming out that today, April 30th, 2020, there's a demonstration growing at Pendleton CI in Indiana by folks incarcerated there. A number of prisoners will refuse meals today due to neglect, poor treatment, and prison officials' complete lack of care and concern in regard to crisis management or emergency response during this global pandemic. Prisoners have reported receiving sparse and poorly put together sack lunches and one small bag of cereal a day. They're demanding proper nutrition during this time that will serve to sustain and fortify themselves against sickness, as well as proper personal protective equipment, or PPE, and cleaning supplies in order to clean and sanitize their cells and such. Word comes out from inside Pendleton despite the apparent manipulation of prisoners' J-Pay tablets that are used for communication. It's presumed that the disconnections are done in order to slow or stop communication with the outside world. The tablets were disconnected completely for several days about a week ago, leaving prisoners with absolutely no way to contact anyone on the outside after a physical altercation occurred between pigs and prisoners when the pigs attempted to house prisoners confirmed to be COVID-19 positive with those who had not been confirmed to have it. An article discussing this topic should be forthcoming by Kevin Rashid Johnson, who is incarcerated at Pendleton CI, sometime today. That can be found at rashidmod.com. And you can call Pendleton CI in Indiana to lodge a complaint for this treatment, support the hunger strikers, and express concern by calling the number 765-778-2107. All of these numbers and addresses and links will be up in our show notes. Finally, one last announcement. Before we get started with the interviews, Josh Williams, who is serving an 8-year sentence connected with his participation in the Ferguson Uprising, is up for parole in June of 2020, and there's a call for people to write him support letters. The letters themselves should be addressed to the parole board, but sent to Josh's prison address. You can find a sample letter for the people up here at freejoshwilliams.com/freejosh. You can also find his address where to send the letters to. If people would like to send a printed letter but don't currently have access to printing, you could contact the coordinator at freejoshwilliams@gmail.com, and hopefully something can be sorted out that way. And feel free to share this call out.
So yeah, we were talking about the prisoner union, and this is the 70s, 1973?
Yeah, 73, 74, 75, actually all the way up to 77 when the Supreme Court made a ruling that it was unconstitutional.
Can have a prisoner union?
Yeah, they ruled it was unconstitutional, the United States Supreme Court. But by that time, they had signed up thousands of prisoners all over the country in different states, that had started their own union there in that state, in the state prisons. But here's the deal, all this came after the Attica Rebellion, and the massacre there and everything, and the anger of the prisoners, took various forms. You had other rebellions, and you had strikes, and you had a number of things like that happen in local prisons. But then some people organized. I think it was in North Carolina, as far as I can remember. The original prisoners' labor union was started by a guy named Jim Grant, who was a civil rights activist, and some other prisoners in the North Carolina state prison system. It also was going down in places like Walpole in Massachusetts, and that movement. First was just, the strike. And then after that, and they made contacts with activists on the outside, which is a common thing back in the 1970s and the 60s, was to make contacts with activists on the outside. And they were able to get some support from the outside. And so they started organizing a union. They didn't ask for a union. You know, they didn't say, "Can we have a union officer, a warden?" So they just started organizing unions all over, and it started just sweeping the country. California had a big contingent, and everything, and other states as well, and it just started sweeping the country. And before long, thousands of prisoners were in these unions, and they were demanding, prisoners' rights, and an end to, this beatings in prison and long-term confinement, deprival of, basic human rights and all this kind of thing. And so as it got stronger, it tried to build a central union, and it was that point that, and this is after some years had gone down, and after protests and organizing and people on the outside putting pressure on the government and so forth, after all this had gone on, then when they tried to create the central prisoners' labor union, that's when the wardens took them to prison, the various state wardens and prison wardens and so forth took them to court and wound up finally in the United States Supreme Court. I think it was 77 or 78 that they got the decision against the whole idea of this kind of movement being unconstitutional, they said, and a threat to prison security, So, it was interesting that at that time many of us, we had a split in our ranks because some of us believed that, going to court and fighting and all this was the good thing to do, and others of us felt like we should just continue organizing and build the strongest possible movement that could even resist, repression. And it didn't matter in the final analysis because they just, came down on those of us that they thought were leaders and so forth, and and just put us away. Now there's one thing though in the federal prison system. I knew Jim Grant. I met Jim Grant in prison. They shipped him out of North Carolina down to the Atlanta federal prison, and we had started to build a federal prisoners' labor union. Tried to do that, and of course it was around that time that the decision came down and everything, and they isolated a bunch of us and all that. Shit. But here's the deal: the prisoners' labor union, the difference between it and just the strikers that we've seen in recent years is it recognized it was hooked up with the Black Power movement. It was hooked up with the Black Power movement, the Civil Rights movement, and other organizations that they're still alive on the outside. And
that's the question. What would you say then of like the need to connect groups like Movement for Black Lives into more radical Black organizations that do like grassroots stuff on the outside with the prison movement?
Well, I'll say this, and that requires some study, but I just off the hand, I would think that the movement, which has to be led by prisoners, and the movement on the outside has to be, supportive of the prison struggle. Yeah. But like I'd written, myself some time ago about how activists on the outside have got to start pressuring the state governments and the feds and everybody else while the movement on the inside is building, and it doesn't just mean standing on the outside with a picket sign, but, as I've written about, going where the officials have their meetings and all these corporations that make money off of prison labor, and there are quite a few of them, expose that and some of the stuff that the pre-Alabama movement had started to talk about in this period. We should be doing it that way, and as far as organizations and movements, well, I'm not sure that those forces are looking for a mass campaign, a mass approach. When I was in prison, what broke up everything was this attempt by organizations on the outside to find some so-called leader or something on the inside, or make him a leader, some prisoner, and he would spout their line and all this kind of thing. So yeah. I'm not sure that these movements that exist right now would be willing or able to take leadership from prisoners. And I'm not sure. I don't know. We can't say this is 1970 something. And the prison movement that existed at that time saw itself, and actually people on the outside saw it as being a autonomous protest movement.
You're bringing a much-needed critique right now.
Well, but in terms of the movement then, it had already reached a high stage of development and struggle. That's one of the things to bear in mind. So you can't just get that overnight. Now, I think the movement now would be different and should be different. Technology or different political perspectives and so forth. Some of that's good, some of it's bad. Some of it, I don't know how much support on the inside there is with, for instance, Black Lives Matter and all that stuff. To be quite honest, and it's a different kind of organization from most of the groups in the 1970s. It's much more of a petty bourgeoisie organization, and they're very sectarian in a lot of ways. That's what I found. And but nevertheless, we're not talking about me. We're talking about the ability of the movement on the inside to see these as legitimate allies, especially in the black community, which is really, really important and has been missing for so long. You know what I'm saying? Other than Attica, that moment with Attica, there has not been a mass base of support in the black community for prisoners. It just hasn't existed.
Well, I remember when we were talking, though. I remember when we were talking, and we were talking about it had just been right after the prison strike in 2018, and we were talking about the moment in like the late 90s where it was like 1998. There was critical resistance. There was the anarchist Black Cross like just emerges, kind of reemerges as a federation and a network, and then there's Insight, Women of Color Against Violence. So like there's this moment of Jericho, and then you're also even calling in 2002. You're calling for a united prison front, a whole united movement across, and you actually say verbatim, critical resistance, the North American anarchist Black Crosses, and all movements for like queer, disabled, all oppressed people, colonized people, a united prison front. And so I just want to say that like that moment. So
did it come though?
You agreed. Yeah.
The thing is, did it come? Did it happen?
But what needs to be addressed is that there are these are organizations and networks are in place, and so it's like taking those existing containers and then doing something with them, right?
Well, bear this in mind. It isn't really about organizations as much as it is about prisoners and their families and the communities they come out of, and for instance, what the state has done to communities of color ever since they resorted to the war on drugs, for instance, and with and the rise of the police, paramilitary police, and all these kinds of things. This was stuff that the original Black Panther Party had educated about and tried to fight about, and they were trying to explain to white radical allies and so forth that, the party, we've talked about it. The party had a perspective on fascism and the state. And, their thing was that they realized that, prisoners could not free themselves. They could not liberate themselves. They had to be part of a broad-based mass movement. And that was actually starting to happen to some extent in that period, especially as George Jackson was laying it out. He was explaining a lot of things. But, he was explaining a lot of things, but he was a key figure, and he's a key figure in explaining why we had to have this kind of unity.
You also talk about Martin Sostre.
Yeah, I do. Martin Sostre is my mentor, so what do you think? But Martin was different. See, Martin, he came along before George did, And his organizing was to lay the basic foundation so that you could even read and talk about revolutionary activity, you know what I'm saying, or revolutionary politics. He laid the foundation with that with his lawsuits, and
he did it through the language of fascism, right? He did through the language of anti-fascism, right? Anti-fascist, right? That's the terms he was using?
That's the terms he was using. And because he was saying, like, if you looked at, he said, we're not fighting the police. He said, we're fighting the state. You know, that's some profound shit. I first heard that. And, you know, because the left, there was about all these fucking cops and blah, 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 blah. And the cops are the epitome, you know, they're agents of the state, but they're not the state. You know, and that's the kind of shit he always would tell me. It's important to understand the distinction between, you know, police, what they call police power. And there was a certain period when the so-called police power thing came into existence in the 70s and 80s, you know, where they started, you know, their unions and allowed them to be autonomous from the mayor or some shit like that, or, you know, or some level. And then their rise with paramilitary policing, and including the SWAT teams and beyond that, you know what I'm saying? Because we were talking about how there's differences in this period, and which produced the strikes, and the period that produced the prison labor union. And the prison labor union was a mass movement in and of itself, and it was an autonomous mass movement, and you know, and they were in states all over the country. And so, like I said, it took the Supreme Court to rule that this was unconstitutional. And to this day, and now in this day, activists don't even hardly know about it. And the activists have to be charged to always know about these kinds of movements. You know what I'm saying? Because it makes our work easier in this period with our level of understanding of how we can fight and win. And so this thing was more than just them having strikes. They were organizing local groups, and in local areas they had outside organizers that had groups on the outside working in communities and stuff. Because I remember one of the things when I was in Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, there was this group called Community Aid to Prisoners, and they used to have a radio show on college radio in Atlanta, and they used to come inside and work with the prison, the group we had in there and everything, and the so-called legalized group, the cultural group. They come inside, but their thing was to make sure that prisoners were not, destroyed, because they'd seen the shit happen in Attica and all that. So their thing was that can't let that happen again. We also got to link the community with prisoners and the plight of prisoners and shit, and talk about the unjust and unequal condition of black people that forces us to go to prison anyway, or allows us to be victims of prisoners and all this kind of thing. So I don't know about right now. You know better about right now about what kind of community-based organizing is going on around prison support. The thing that George Jackson was putting forward is that he said that he wanted his idea was to have a movement where the masses of people in the street, including the communities where the prisoners were from, and radical prisoners and revolutionary organizations like the Black Panther Party could work together all over the country and have a dynamic revolutionary perspective on the one hand, but a organizing campaign. We wanted to make the prison movement into a survival movement, like the Black Panther Party organized shit.
Now a brief request from Jonina Abron Ervin. My name is Jonina Abron Ervin. My husband, Lorenzo, and I are an African-American couple in their early 70s. We live in Kansas City, Missouri, where a stay-at-home order has been in effect since March 24th, 2020, due to the coronavirus pandemic. It will remain in effect until at least May 15th, maybe longer. Before the pandemic, we washed our clothes weekly at a local laundromat. Yes, laundromats in Kansas City are considered essential business and remain open. However, we can't go to the laundromat anymore, and we need your help. But first, let me explain why we can't go to the laundromat or anywhere else outside of our house. Due to the coronavirus, just stepping outside makes matters worse and could be a death sentence. Lorenzo has diabetes and other serious illnesses. Doctors throughout America say that it's particularly dangerous for people who have compromised immune systems, which is the case with diabetes, to contract coronavirus. As elderly Black people, we are already at great risk of catching COVID-19 and dying from it if we do. Now we are in the biggest fight of our lives, the fight to stay alive. So a few weeks ago, we had to call out for people to help us, and many of you responded with donations. With donations of money and volunteered to wash our clothes each week. We're very grateful for the excellent mutual aid network in Kansas City that has connected us with people who have volunteered to do our laundry free of charge. There are no words to express how much this has meant to us. However, it is uncertain how long the pandemic will last. It may be weeks or even months before we can safely leave our house to wash our clothes. We don't want to wear out the people helping us now. We've decided that we need a stackable washer and dryer that will fit into our kitchen for $1,500. We estimate that we may need to spend up to $500 more for delivery, installation, and electrical adjustments that may be required to set it up. Having clean clothes is a necessity for all human beings. With a washer and dryer at our house, Lorenzo and I won't have the pressure of worrying about how to get our laundry done, and we can focus on staying alive and continuing our lifelong work as community organizers or trainers. Please help us buy a washer and a dryer. And information about how you can contribute along with this call can be found up at trueleappress.com, and they detail in there that you can PayPal money to organize.the.hood@gmail.com. You can Cash App Casey Goon, or you can Venmo Casey-R-Goonin. So my guest is Bomani Shakur, also known as Keith Lamar, and he's a man who's currently held on death row in Youngstown, Ohio, as a result of the Lucasville Uprising. Bomani was present at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility during the uprising, and prosecutors have accused him of leading a death squad that killed a guard and some prisoners. Thank you so much, Mr. Shakur, for taking the time to chat.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks a lot for having me, yeah.
Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and what Ohio was like when you were coming up in the 70s and 80s?
Well, I'm 50 years old, so I was born in 1969 in Cleveland, Ohio. It's one of the, bigger cities of Ohio. I grew up in the 70s, 80s. I don't have too much of a recollection of the 70s, per se, in terms of the political situation and whatnot, but I grew up in this small place called the Village. It was a working class neighborhood, and mostly who lived there worked at the steel mill, Republic Steel. My grandfather worked there, paid for his house in this little community. And it was 100 houses in this community, and everybody, had owned their own home, worked in the mills. And so my early childhood was relatively peaceful. The most memorable part of my upbringing was that, when I was, between 5 and 10 years old, when, my family and I, my mother, my brother, and sister, I had 2 brothers and a sister, still young and still lived in the village. Not long after I turned 11 or 12 years old, we moved away from the village. And that was my interest into mainstream society, basically. Started going to, public school, a school called Cranwood, and, slowly but surely, because, in the village, we were poor, but we didn't really realize we were poor because that wasn't the values or standards of that community. You can go over to anybody's house around dinner time and, and eat. Everybody was family, literally and figuratively. A lot of people, cousins were cousins because of, the close proximity we all was. It was like a close-knit community. So you had a lot of overlap in relations and whatnot. And, that was a good thing because, I could play with my friends, my cousins, and on a daily basis. And, there was really no judgment about your attire, your social, economic status, because everybody was pretty much the same, even though you had some people who had more than others, but it was never really made a point, something to focus on. But when we moved away from the village, that's when I first became aware that I was poor. And the kids, my peers taught me that. They, made fun of my attire a lot, my appearance a lot. I was a young kid at the time, like 8 or 9 years old. That's what I'm referring to. And so, I was more into playing than I was into, worrying about my hair being combed or anything like that. And then my mother and stepfather, they didn't really, mess with, us boys about our appearance. So I showed up to school looking basically like a homeless person, basically. And the kids basically let me have it, And so gradually, in response to the ridicule and criticisms I received in elementary school, I developed a complex about my appearance and, started, trying to, cut grass, deliver papers and whatnot to make money so I can buy the various clothes I needed to stop this ridicule. And, so that was really where I kind of learned. And of course, as I grew older and went further in the school system, this lesson was compounded. But elementary school is basically where I learned that to have what you have is more important than who you were. I don't know if the kids, I'm not sure the kids wasn't aware that was the lesson that they was teaching, that we were teaching each other, but that's essentially what I came away with when I was around 12 or 13. And, as I entered the junior high and then high school, I, went deeper and deeper off into that erroneous ideal about having things was more important than, the person I was becoming. And I started selling drugs when I was around 13, 14 years old, and, to accumulate money to buy these clothes, Polo, Ralph Lauren shirts, Guess jeans, and all, Michael Jordan shoes, all this material trappings that you see young kids pursuing today. It was no different back then, but with the exception that we were literally dirt poor. And so, I became a drug dealer. By the time I was 15, I was living in my own apartment, driving a Mercedes-Benz, ran Rolex watches, had a pocket full of money, and a whole bunch of friends, quote unquote, people who, wouldn't have anything to do with me when I was, had a shabby attire, whatnot. But now all of a sudden, because, I had, name brand clothing, I was, pretty much one of the most popular individuals at my high school. And by the time I turned 17 years old, I had really exhausted all my options as a drug dealer, basically. I mean, I was driving around in this foreign automobile and, driving around the same, fill up my gas tank and just drive around all day, basically, like a politician. Selling drugs, picking up money, shooting dice. And it was the same day over and over again. I got really exhausted living like that. And there at the end, when I was around 18 years old, a group of guys tried to rob me. I had been robbed several times leading up to that, and a group of guys came to rob me. Instead of, giving them my jewelry as I did the first occasion, I, pulled a gun out and I, engaged in a shootout. I was shot twice myself in the legs and ended up shooting a guy twice in the chest. He died, and, I came to prison. That's how I ended up in prison in a nutshell. Yeah,
So fast forward, I guess, 4 years, right, to, because you went in 89, to the Lucasville Uprising in April of 1993. Can you talk about what SOCF was like at that point, what Lucasville Penitentiary was like, and where you were when stuff popped off, and what you were doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I have to go back a little bit because what Lucasville was in 1993 was a result of what it was in 1991. And 1991, a white school teacher was murdered by a black inmate. And I emphasize the race because Lucasville is located in southern Ohio.
This call is originating from an Ohio correctional facility and may be recorded and monitored.
In the predominantly white community, and the prisoners are, majority black prisoners, from the inner city and whatnot. And these are kind of like, I guess you would call Hicks, people who hasn't really had any, day-to-day interaction with black people, except, through stereotypes or through in the prison. And so, when his female guard was murdered, people in the surrounding community was calling for the prison to be locked down, calling for more severe measures to be implemented to, quell some of the violence that was going on. Because Lucasville was one of the most dangerous prisons in the state of Ohio, probably still is, though I haven't been down there in a few decades now. And so they, appointed a new warden, Arthur Tate. And he was brought in as someone who was believed to be a hardliner, that he would, put the hammer down, restore order and, get the prisoners in line. And so he enacted, a whole lot of kind of draconian standards and practices and whatnot, just forcing guys to sell with people that they didn't necessarily get along with. You didn't really have any say on, where you sell or who you sell with, and which was something in prior administrations. You had that because you're living with people, and so that you created kind of unstable situation if you are forced to live with somebody you don't get along with. But he didn't, really care about those type of things, and he wanted to, exert his dominance. Flash forward a few years after the teacher was murdered to 1993. And he had drew lines on the floor, and we had to stay within the lines. It was almost like a military academy. It's what he was seen to be after at the time. And of course, when you have your foot on people's necks who are already oppressed, it only created a kind of powder keg that just building and building. And right before the uprising, they had every year they came around and tested prisoners for tuberculosis. And this particular year, for some reason, the Muslims refused to take the test on the grounds that the test contained an alcoholic substance called phenol. And apparently that was, against, it was prohibited from ingesting alcohol because of their religious beliefs. And, they tried to have an audience with the warden and the deputy warden to try to suggest alternative ways this test could be administered, but Tate, and keep it with his hardline attitude, refused them outright and gave them an ultimatum and told them that they either take the test or they'll be locked up, put in a hole. He told them this, I believe, on a Thursday or Friday, and let them stew over, their decision over the weekend. And the Muslims on the Sunday, April 11th, Easter Sunday, decided that they would, take that day as an opportunity to stage what they claim would be a peaceful protest. On April 11th, this is, according to the record, several Muslims attacked guards, commandeered the keys and opened up all the cell doors. And like I said, to start this protest. But once they opened the doors, it was like opening up or striking a match, and things very quickly got out of hand. When the riot first occurred, I was on the riot because I was on the yard, on the recreation yard, and this was one of the first few days of spring in the yard. Had been closed the whole winter, and so I took advantage of the opportunity to go out and get some fresh air. I was out there running and exercising, and a guard came. When it was time to come back in, a guard came running out with blood streaming down his face and whatnot. And so that was the first indication that I or all the people on the yard, had something, going wrong on the inside. And of course, after time went on, we realized that it was a disturbance that was happening, and that, the Muslims, they had made it known that they had commandeered the prison and that they were staging the protest, and asked if anybody who wanted to participate, because, they weren't the only ones who were being oppressed down there. We all were. We all were living under these kind of adverse conditions and, subjected to these arbitrary rules and regulations and whatnot that Tate was implementing to, for him, to his way of thinking would, quell the violence that was going on. It really just, made things worse. as it often does, And so, eventually one of my friends came out and he told me, it gave me, a hint of what was going on. And, from what I initially understood is that guys was going into, other guys' sales, stealing their personal belongings and whatnot. And I didn't have much. And I also didn't appreciate the magnitude of what was going on. This was in the beginning of the uprising. And so, I'm thinking that, it would probably be something, a minor skirmish, and, it'd be over within an hour or so. As you probably know, it lasted 11 days. And so, I was way off in my estimation of how serious, severe, things were. And so I went inside, and I happened to be selling an L6 on L side in the 6th pod. And that coincidentally was the pod where the guards had been pushed into shower stalls, and later where the last snitches were allegedly killed. And, I went back into that pod before all these things happened to check on my personal belongings. And, I saw the guards in the shower stall, and, of course, seeing that and put me on notice as to the severity of what was going on, because whether or not it lasted 11 days or not, you took the step to take guards hostage. This is serious now. And so, once I, gradually understood the seriousness of it, I, of course, compared it to my personal belongings and decided to go back on the yard. I was 23 years old at the time. Wasn't necessarily political. I had been doing some reading, like Malcolm X and Frantz Fanon and things of that nature, but I wasn't necessarily what I would call political, or even necessarily aware of that anything can be done about the oppression that we were living under. That wasn't my mentality at the time. I didn't really have that kind of awareness, and not a lot of people did. In fact, the majority of us filed out into the yard and stayed on the yard until late in the evening, early morning, actually, until the Highway State Patrol. So, you have the Muslims commandeered the prison, then you have the Aryan Brotherhood who joined ranks with the Muslims and another group of individuals called the Black Gangster Disciples. And so now you have 3 gangs or organizations presiding over this uprising. And then you have guys who, like myself, were out on the yard, watching everything unfold. A lot of people are under pressure since I'm on death row that I was a part of one of those 3 factions, but I wasn't. And I came out onto the yard and was actually picked up from the yard when the Highway State Patrol came out early morning, April the 12th, and ushered us all into the gymnasium. And so I didn't stay inside for the 11 days. Wasn't present when the murders was happening. I was on the yard when they brought bodies out onto the yard and dumped the bodies on the yard. By that time, the Highway State Patrol had took up a stance around the perimeter fence to make sure no one escaped, but they didn't come in to try to quell, the uprising. They, stood there along with us and watched as dead bodies were dumped on the yard. So I witnessed that part of the uprising, and little did I know at the time that I would ultimately be accused in killing these individuals who I was watching, whose bodies I was watching, being dumped on the yard. So that was one of the first disconnects in, how, I became involved in this whole thing. As I said, they put us in the gym early the next morning, stripped us of all our clothes, and so we were naked, 10 of us, and forced us into this cell. And that's really where, my problem started. I write about it extensively in my book, so it might not do justice describing it over the phone. But while in that cell, an inmate named Dennis Weaver lost his life, and I was ultimately accused, forcing individuals to do that and participate in it. But in actuality, it was another guy named Shabazz who, really sparked all the confrontations in that particular situation. and, saw a way to, shift the blame onto me after he and the other two guys who helped him murder Dennis Weaver. Because Shabazz and I got into an altercation while we was in the cell. He was kind of like a bully type individual, and he was going around really trying to put his bluff down on each of the individuals in the cell. And when he got to me, I just, hauled off and punched him in his face. Something that I talk about in my book. And because of that altercation, I think that was what gave him the incentive to really just say, let's just say Keith did it. And that became the reframe, as I later, but it wasn't simply somebody pointing a finger at me. Later, when they put us under investigation and, for nothing, we didn't have anything to do with the riot. We was on the yard, and they put us under investigation, took all our property. And so, it was really in that context that I began to become a little political, if not knowledgeable about the politics. I don't mean to say that. I just mean to say that to buy into that us against them mentality. And so, we start, the group of guys who I was around. This after the riot is already over with. After all the, was said and done, the bodies and whatnot, had us under investigation for, something that we had.
This call is originating from an Ohio correctional facility and may be recorded and monitored.
And that got old pretty, fairly quickly. And, we started tearing up the cell blocks we were in, throwing our food onto the range, getting into confrontation with the Highway State Patrol, suggesting, or advocating that no one talk to the authorities. And that's how I became a target, by participating in those demonstrations. And one of the things I like people to understand about the uprising is that immediately after the uprising, the state sent in their investigators, and they trampled the crime scene. And they collected over 22,000 pieces of evidence, quote unquote, but none of it could be matched to any victim or assailant. No fingerprints, no forensic or anything, because they rushed in, and trampled the crime scene, basically. They sent everything off to the crime lab to be tested, and it came back empty-handed. And so what they had to do, the only thing they could do, is create a team of informants and select people who they wanted to indict and put on.
Quick question, just for clarification, so that if I'm making a mistake, I should know. Do you prefer Keith? Do you prefer Bomani? I know one ties directly to the legal case and legal support. What should I be calling you?
Yeah, we should talk about that, because, that's a question that a lot of people, ask me. And so, Bomani Shakur is a name that I selected, when I was, thrown into the midst of all this, madness, and needed something to kind of steer me through without, losing hold of myself. So it's not so much a rebellion against my government name, so to speak. It's just a way to reaffirm my purpose and conviction, because it's easy to lose track of those things when you're in a situation like this, and that stretches over, such a great length of time and difficulties,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially when you've got a number imposed on you, that's attached to your name, and it seems really powerful to be able to pick something that is so symbolically important to you and representative of your struggle.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But the number, along with, just the structure of this place, is a reduction, right, of your humanity, to just reduce you to an animal. And so, choosing the name Bomani, the full name is Bomani Shakur. Bomani is mighty soldier. Handu is prepared for war. And Shakur is the thankful. And so those attributes, so when somebody say, "Hey, Bomani," it's just a reminder just that you are a mighty, soldier, and that, whatever difficulties that might be experiencing at that time, it's just a reminder that you can rise above those things, whatever it may be. And Handu, be prepared. It's just to, stay focused and to, study, just try to be as prepared as you possibly can, and thankful, Shakur it's just, no matter how difficult or dark, the present moment might be, be thankful for the fact that you are alive, that you are, healthy, that you, have a lot of good people in your life, and that, though the circumstances are, out of my control to a certain degree, that, be thankful that I still have my faculties, that I can still stand up and fight for myself. So, I'm thankful for all the good things that are in my life that, me staying the course, has produced in my life. And so, my name is not just, words. It's, like the number, like my, prison number. It's just, it resonate meaning for me. When somebody call me Bomani, they're just really calling me to remember who I am. And, so that was it's my freedom name, way for me to, hold on to my freedom, in the midst of all this, it's because, it's overwhelming being in a situation like this. And then a lot of times you feel, especially in the beginning, I felt like I was in this by myself. Not so much now, I'm 50 years old and I've come a long way in terms of my development and whatnot. And so I've been lucky enough, to garner a lot of support. But in the beginning, when I was not who I am today, it was, kind of a whole lot more difficult to navigate, things. And so, the name started with that. That was the first realization that I needed to, inject some purpose into my life and not just drift aimlessly through my days, that I need to be about, the business of freeing myself and representing myself. And so, the name along with, writing a book and all the other things have just been, me putting one foot in front of the other and trying to, find my way forward, basically. Yeah.
So getting back to the days at 1993, you had said that you hadn't, before the book, you had done some reading, you hadn't been like what you would consider to be like very much engaged in politics. You'd read some Fanon and some Malcolm X. I know for a lot of people, like looking back and studying the uprising between the self-advocacy of the Muslims, rebelling against this like obvious insult to their, to their strictures of their faith. And also the fact that those three groups, in particular, the Muslims and the Black Gangster Disciples, as they were called at the time, and the Aryan Brotherhood could come together and, obviously imperfect, but decrease the amount of killing and theft and harm that was occurring within the facility, possibly. And a lot of people took from it this message of like a convict race, of a common shared oppression by the system. It seems like the story of what happened next and what happened in the courts was in a lot of ways a continuation of that same call, the baying for blood by the neighboring communities. Like this is happening at the same time as the Waco invasion is happening in Texas, and so that's one reason that a lot of people won't have heard about the Lucasville Uprising. That's where all the cameras are pointed. But I'd love to hear what you have to say about following the initial investigation where everything was trampled, how the trial was conducted, and why do you think it was so easy for these people maybe who participated in the violence to finger you and State Prosecutor Mark Piepmeyer and others to target you throughout the case for blame?
Well, I think they mainly, I believe they were primarily interested in convicting someone for the guard's murder, obviously, because in terms of the 11 other people who were killed, his life was the only life that really had any real value, right? They didn't give a damn about the prisoners who were killed. As I said, they stood there and watched along with everyone else as those bodies were dumped on the yard. I could have been one of those bodies. And I wasn't political, but, I was, extremely upset at the way that, after the riot, in the way that we were being treated, and, I was vocal in my, anger of that treatment, and, I was doing 15 years to life, with the possibility of parole at the time. And so when they, finally singled in on me, focused in on me, they didn't do so with the belief that I would go forward and demand a trial. You know, they came to me, hey, look, Keith, you know, they called me by my first name as if we was, you know, old pals or whatever. And they said, look, you know, and they spelled it out for me, basically. You know, did the math for me. You know, it's a real basic math. You know, if you go forward, you know, we're going to put you on death row. If you take this deal, you have a possibility to go home in your early 50s. You know, but, you know, I said, you know, but I didn't do what y'all claiming I did. You know, I didn't have anything to do with it. I came out on the yard. Hey, listen, we're not here to talk about that. You know, about what you did or what you didn't do. That obviously is a moot issue at this point. We're trying to figure out whether or not you're going to accept this deal. And it's a good deal. And it was a good deal. You know, 90% of the people who are in prison are here because they've taken a deal. They've taken a lesser sentence than the one that they can potentially get, you know, if they demand a jury trial. You know. But I had taken a lot of deals up until that point in my life. You know, I dropped out of school. I became a drug dealer as I, you know, recounted. And you know, I had, you know, really, really just turned my back on my potential. And I didn't realize it until I came to prison. Until I really had the type of opportunity to slow down and see what I had done with my life. You know, because, you know, when I was 14 going, you know, all the way through 19, it was just a blur, really. You know, every day was, you know, a party, basically. I'm getting high, I'm selling drugs, I'm shooting dice, I'm spending money, and, you know, I'm living what I thought or believed at the time was a good life. You know, but at the end, as I mentioned, I had came to the realization that, you know, something was amiss. And right before I caught the murder case, I had disavowed all, you know, the drug dealing and getting high and all that, and I got baptized. It's a funny thing, you know, I said, well, man, I'm going to turn my life over to God. And this is the second time I did that in my life. I did it once when I was 13, when I felt like my life was coming apart, when I was losing control of the direction of my life. And I did it again when I was 18, 6 months before I ultimately took somebody's life and came to prison. So it was always a part in me that wanted to, you know, find my way back to myself, to the self I was before I got caught up in, you know, the mainstream, I guess you could say, before I got caught up in all the material trappings that go along with, you know, this society, you know. And so when I came to prison and when I was offered the deal, I was just tired, man. I was just sick of just taking the easy way out in my life, you know. And so I refused it. I said, you know, I'm not going to do that, man. I'm done taking deals. I'm done, you know, going along. You know, because, you know, and not only you taking deals to get home to, you know, possibly I could have got on the stand and lied on somebody else, even though, you know, a lot of guys opt to, you know, take that route. You know, that just wasn't an option for me either. You know, so the only option, you know, that I had, because, you know, they made it, you know, plain that somebody's going to death row. In fact, before we was even, you know, put on trial, a lot of us was moved to the bottom range of the death row pod so we can get accustomed to the ideal. And it was crazy. So I had a kind of foreshadowing, a kind of glimpse of what death row would be like because I was there before I even went to trial. You know, and I still made the decision to go forward. You know, I had never, you know, had a trial. And as I said, not a lot of people have. And so, you know, I didn't really know what to expect, you know, but, you know, they offered me a deal. You know, I refused it. I demanded a trial. And, you know, I got to see firsthand really what justice, you know, is about in this country, man. You know, a lot of people, you know, look at these, you know, crime dramas on television and think from that they have a sense of what the American justice system is about. But that's TV shit. You know, in real life, the first thing they do, especially if you're black, you know, the first thing they do is try to strike all the black jurors from the jury pool, and so they can have a all-white jury. And, you know, that's their secret weapon. You know, to assemble an all-white jury. That's the first thing. And they, you know, and they go through this process called voir dire, where where you're allowed to question people, try to figure out what their political leanings are and whatnot. And it was just amazing. You know, I was 23, 24 years old at the time, and so wasn't really adapting, interpreting all these different, complicated words and processes and whatnot. And, but I grew up in the streets. I grew up with people, say one thing and do another. And I grew up around con men, and I saw the jury that they was trying to finagle their way onto the jury so they can, have the experience, I guess, to tell their children one day, I put a black man on death row. If you know anything about history, and I've seen history books about the lynching that went on in this country, you see, most of those lynchings were attended by crowds of white people standing there with sandwiches and like it was some kind of picnic, some kind of extravaganza or something, and so something to tell your children about that, I did this, and so I saw that whole thing, and then I saw the judge colluding with the prosecutor to deprive me of a fair trial, withholding evidence, coaching witnesses, all these things.
You have 1 minute remaining.
And I was pretty much learning by trial and error. I was just looking and learning a little bit too slow, but I was learning though. So the stuff that I'm, saying and sharing, I might not be able to benefit from the knowledge because it's after the fact. It's hindsight. It's what I'm talking about. But I'm just telling people, as somebody who has seen it with my own eyes, what the system is really about. I'm one of the few who has peeked around the corner and have developed a vocabulary to talk about these things, to articulate, what the reality of this system is. And so that's basically what my primary objective is, just to tell people that this system is a sham. It really is. From Dean to, as they say, it's just one big mockery, man. It's just, like from
Thank you for using GTL.
So, Bomani, I wondered if you could talk a bit about you had a Brady hearing a few years back to attempt to get a new trial, as far as I'm aware, because there were so many instances where the prosecutors had denied potentially exculpatory evidence from the defense. And we all know that like public defense in this country anyway is perpetually like underfunded when you get a good defender who actually wants to do their job. We've had Mickey Schwartz on the show before, which we're very lucky for. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of that evidence that you're aware of that was withheld from your ability to defend yourself, and what that Brady hearing was like too.
Yeah, well, when you go to trial, you one of the first things your defense attorneys do is file a motion for discovery, because discovery is the mechanism that through which you defend yourself. You want to know who said what and when, how many times did they say it. And when we requested this discovery, the statements, witnesses who testified on me, and it's not just people who said they saw me kill somebody, there's exculpatory evidence of people who said they saw somebody else kill the same people for whom I was charged with. And so what they did, and it was the first time, I haven't heard one attorney say that they have ever seen anything like this. What they did, instead of turning over the statements, they divided the names of the individual who made these exculpatory statements in one column and put a summary of their statements in another column, mixed them up. Didn't tell us who said what, or, what was going on. I talk about this in my book. And they said, well, this is the best we can do. So it wasn't straightforward from the beginning. Not only that, I found out afterwards that a guy, I was accused of being the leader of the death squad. And you remember I said it was three groups who were, it was widely known that they were in charge of the riot, Aryan Brotherhood, the Muslims, and the Black Gangster Disciples. Well, the leaders from the Black Gangster Disciples were basically made of the star witnesses for the state after everything was all over said and done, particularly a guy named Lavelle and Stacey Gordon. And Stacey Gordon, from what I've been able to piece together since the riot, he may have been the leader of the death squad, based on some of the people who actually saw what was going on. But, that didn't come out till after the fact. Because one of the other things that the state did, when I asked for my discovery, they gave my discovery to Jason Robb, gave Jason Robb discovery to me, gave my, and so on and so forth, switched up, they put everything, mixed everything up, And so we didn't find out until we got on death row proper that, what the state strategy had been. And I found out that a guy named Aaron Jefferson had came forward and admitted to killing somebody for whom I was sentenced to death, a guy named Daryl DePina. And for people who read that statement, the interviewer, has some doubts about his a recollection of the death of the guard, because he admitted to assaulting the guard, Vallandigham, who was ultimately killed in the riot, and he admitted to assaulting a guy named Emmanuel Newell. And during that interrogation, the interviewer called into question his recollection of these incidents, but not the one pertaining to Daryl DePina, which is the guy he admitted to killing. But they had already had me on the hook for that. And so they just blew over it, just, buried that statement. And not only that, some of the key witnesses for the state, it wasn't until their fourth or fifth statements that they all agreed that Keith Lamar was the leader of the death squad. In their first generation, the first statements, the first copy of the statements, they were pointing their finger at someone else or didn't know who, did what. But what happened in there is, remember, go back to what I was saying, that of the 22,000 pieces of evidence that was collected, none of it, all of it was contaminated. So they didn't have an objective case. So what they did, the only thing they could have done is put together this team. They moved them to this hospital called Oakwood here in Ohio, and they went over script. They had an open door policy, and all this documented after the fact. They had an open door policy in this prison where, these informers was going back and forth, sharing stories, collaborating, on this narrative, and they just rolled it out, man. And we didn't realize, because that's the only thing they could do. And not only that, they put together this snitch academy, is what it was later came to be known as. But they prevented me from putting forth a proper defense. That was part of their strategy as well. Well, flash forward to 2007, I won an evidentiary hearing. The federal courts, called me back to court and allowed us to call the prosecutor Pete Meyer, who you mentioned earlier. And we put him on the stand. He admitted on the stand that they used what was later defined as a narrow standard with regard to Brady. His standard was, okay, it's only exculpatory if we call somebody forward and he, at the end of his statement, say, by the way, Keith Lamar was not there. Unless he says that, so just to, let you understand what I mean by that, if a guy came forward and claimed to have saw somebody do the very thing that I was accused of and explain it in graphic detail, if this person, before he get up and leave that interview, if he didn't say, oh, by the way, Keith Lamar was not there, that statement was not turned over to my defense. And all the judges, and during this evidentiary hearing, Hassan's attorney, Jason Robb's attorney, the James Ware attorney, they were present when this was going on, when the prosecutor Pete Meyer made these admissions, and they jumped right on it. And they filed that, necessary briefs, and then they got their cases put on hold, and some of the cases are still on hold. Barring, and the judges in their respective cases said that, listen, this is a narrow standard that the prosecutor Pete Meyer used, and we're going to allow y'all to go back to comb the file yourselves. And if y'all finding something that's exculpatory, that y'all deem exculpatory, bring it back to me, and I'll make that determination. My attorneys, for some unfathomable reason, didn't file those motions. I talk about this also in my book, at length. And, this is one of the main contentions around which we fell out, because, after, they promised that they would file the motions to put my case on hold because, mind you, it was at my evidentiary hearing that these admissions were made. And so if anybody should benefit from this new knowledge, it should have been me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm glad that other guys were able to benefit from it, but I'm just talking about the shabby representation that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And see, that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand about the criminal justice system. If you pour you really don't have a say in your representation. These attorneys expect you to sit there and shut your mouth, And a lot of times, as it is in my case, I was so young, I didn't really know anything about the criminal justice system. And, I've learned a great deal since my conviction, but, you can't put the wine back in the bottle. So as they say, I'm grasping at straws, basically. As you might know, I received an execution date last year for the 16th of November, 2023. And one of the things, the Ohio Supreme Court issued that execution date. And in 2014, the Ohio Supreme Court, the same body of judges, convened a task force to study the death penalty here in Ohio and charged them to come up with recommendations to make the carrying out of capital punishment more equitable here in this state. And one of the recommendations that the task force was made up of lawyers, academics, ex-judges and whatnot, so credentialed people, paid for through taxpayer funding. One of the recommendations that they came up with, that they gave to the Supreme Court here, Ohio Supreme Court, is that no one can be sentenced to death based solely on the uncorroborated testimony of jailhouse informants. So not only can you not put them on death row, but you definitely can't kill them, based on this uncorroborated testimony. And as I said at the outset, when they came into the prison after the uprising, they trampled the crime scene, so there's no forensic evidence. There never was. And that's the crux of my case as it stands right now. Is trying to get the Ohio Supreme Court, the people who gave me an execution date, to follow the recommendation of the task force that they convened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm hopefully going to build my movement around. Just that fact alone. I'm not even supposed to be on death row, for the simple fact that I'm innocent first and foremost. But secondly, legally, they wasn't supposed to be able to put me on death row because they didn't have any corroborating evidence. All they had was jailhouse informants who they paid to say what they said, and I can prove that.
And so those informants were paid how? Were they given, breaks on their sentences, or?
Paid in early paroles, paid in cushy prison assignments. They was moved from maximum security to minimum security. The majority of them went home early. A lot of them had blood on their hands, so they were paid in reduced sentences. And Lavelle, who was the ringleader, and possibly, from what I understand, had a hand in killing the guard, is on the street now. So paid in real, in a real way, in a real sense, Yeah.
How are you requesting for people on the outside to help with that push to get the Ohio Supreme Court, I guess, to reassess your conviction?
Well, it's about doing the things that we're doing now. The whole point of me doing this, this interview, is to make people aware of my situation. That's the whole point of writing the book. Because people have to believe in order for a movement to sustain itself, people have to believe in what they're involved in. So what I'm, basically trying to do is retry my case in the court of public opinion, and just get the people to learn the particulars of my case, and not just the particulars of my case, the particulars of the MO of the system, how the system operates.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a playbook that I'm actually talking about. I mean, it seems incredible, for me to say, hey, listen, I was framed and this is how. But you go back to the Attica riot, if you go back to, they just got this movie come out, Just Mercy, with Brian Stevenson, and the way that they railroaded this innocent man onto death row. It's the same thing happened in my case. So it's a playbook that I'm talking about, an old playbook that stretches back to slavery after it became, extrajudicial murders, lynchings were, frowned upon in society. So, it's legal lynching now. And it's a way that they go about doing that, and I'm just trying to, get people to wake up to the realities of how the system actually operates. And wake up to the reality that, we like to believe that we have overcome, as a society, as a people, that we have come a long way in terms of race relations in this country. But, fundamentally, especially when you're talking about the justice system, fundamentally, nothing has changed, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing had changed. So I don't like to talk about my story as it's something new, that this is something that's only happening to Keith Lamar, to Bomani Shakur. This is a system that I'm talking about. I mean, poor people who are, hearing this message and wondering why you should, give a damn about me and what happens to my life, you should understand that this can happen to somebody that you love, somebody that you care about. And when it's your turn, they don't, as they say in Judge Mercy, they don't need any evidence or fingerprints or anything. And so, we have to, come together to, make sure that justice is a two-way street. Make sure that, the people who are, exacting these harsh penalties, that they are held accountable when they are wrong, and that they are, brought to bear or held to some kind of, accountability when it's discovered that they are wrong. Because it could be said that, I didn't know, at the time. I don't see how in my instance they couldn't have known, right? But what they assumed, and they had reason to believe that I would, plead guilty, because that's what people do. If you're poor, if you're black, if you, dealing with a racist system, it's not a matter of whether or not I'm innocent or not, but what kind of deal I can get. That's what it comes down to, basically. And so, and I knew that, I understood that. I'm not saying that I was completely naive. I had copped out before, but in that instance, I was actually guilty. And I didn't think I was getting away with anything. Like I said, I had just got baptized 6 months before I caught the murder case. So I had an inkling that I was on the wrong path. And so me pleading guilty was another way to reclaim myself, to find my way back to myself. I wasn't really trying to find an easy way out. But I pled guilty because I was guilty. And here these people come around and ask me to plead guilty to 5 murders. As if we're talking about, $5 or 5 Big Macs, 5 hamburgers. Because that's essentially what, if you're poor and you're black in this country, that's essentially what your life amounts to. Your life isn't worth really shit. The only value that your life has is the value that you place on it. And so that goes back to, me selecting the name Bomani. That's a way for me to inject value into my life, into, my path. I intend to pursue it, to the bitter end as need be. If people, hear my story and it resonates with them and they feel that, they should support me because they understand that they too are caught up in the same, system, then, with those people, I'm in solidarity. I don't necessarily believe that, this, I don't believe in fairy tales. I don't, necessarily believe that, this situation, will end happily ever after. More likely than not, I would end up doing the rest of my life in prison or, strapped down to a gurney somewhere. So I've already, come to terms with those realities. So that's not really what's guiding me now. Fear of those outcomes.
As you said, this isn't just about you, but it is about you, and you've made a lot of efforts while on the inside while building your case and trying to seek justice and reprieve from this injustice. You've also been working very hard writing the book, revising it. You participated in a number of different interviews with folks on the outside, academics and journalists, and you've helped to set up and run Native Sons as a program. Can you talk a bit about how you've been giving back to the world while Ohio has kept you locked in a cage?
That again goes back to me trying to redeem myself. When you go to prison, the ideal, or the theory at least, is that, you are a member of society who have ran afoul of the standards and laws of the community, and so you are sent to prison to be prepared to that community, right? But, we all know that that's not the case, and that really the criminal justice system, it's a business. Mm-hmm. It's an $80 billion a year business, man. So we're talking a lot of money is involved in, putting people in these cells. And you can say whatever you want to say, but they created the justification to, lock people up in these cages. And I came to that understanding quite late in my life, but I came to it though. And so, one of the things you talk about the nonprofit, getting books into younger people, part of, my understanding about my life is, my life is just not, for myself. I come from a community, from a people, and this community that I come from are oppressed. It's some young person right now sitting at home or walking down the street right now who would be where I'm at, because that's how the system works, right? And so it's my, job to try to get some kind of information into this young person's hand to, try to help him interrupt, this plan, that is, set up for him. Because it's not anything personal. And that's really the most horrifying thing about, living this life. I mean, they don't really give a damn about Keith Lamar. Keith Lamar is nobody. Another nigga we gonna kill. They've been killing niggas in America for 400 years, and everybody know that. I mean, let's talk real about it. But that's how they feel, not how I feel. And so I have to, behave in a way that reflects my beliefs and feelings. And so, what I do is try to, get books in these people in, because books are coming into a great awareness of who I am and what life is about. It's what has allowed me to, survive what I've been through. You shouldn't have to learn about life. You shouldn't have to come to prison to learn about life, to learn about who you are, to be educated. And I was mentioning to someone the other day about the root word of education is educe, to bring forth that which is already there. That's not being done in the public school system. You go through all those years of education and end up at the end of all of that learning, quote unquote, and don't have a clue about who you are. And that's on purpose. Because your life is not your life, as far as these people are concerned. As far as they're concerned, your life is just a piece of firewood that they're going to throw on the fire when the fire...
This call is originating from an Ohio correctional facility and may be recorded and monitored.
That's all it is. And it's not just black people, it's poor people in general. People don't give a damn about our lives. That includes the guards that work here. What I was telling the guy yesterday about, when I was young, I used to hate the police, man, the guards. Because it was obvious to me that they was profiting from my pain, off my pain. Not so different than me standing on the corner profiting off the pain of these drug addicts and whatnot. See, that's how I saw it, and I still see it that way. But I realized that they just poor people trying to provide for their family. It's despicable, though, but that's what capitalism is about. It's about degradation. It's about bringing people down to their lowest level so, they don't have any qualms about exploiting, their neighbor. That's what it's all about. But, you as an individual, you might not be able to change the world, but you can change yourself. That's what I'm trying to, the knowledge I'm trying to get into young people to understand that, this thing is big. Yes, it is. The universe is vast, man. It's big, and you might not be able to change races. You might not, because, people who are, far, more intelligent than I am have tried. And yet here we are in the 21st century, and we're still having the same conversation. So I'm not under the illusion that, I'm going to be to say anything to change the system, but I have changed myself, though. And no matter what these people say, no matter what they ultimately do, they can't change that fact. That's what I'm trying to, get other young people to understand,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Kind of on that same general topic about the degradation and the view that poor people are replaceable, whether they be the people that are in the cages or the people that are walking around and get to go home at night.
That's right.
Across the U.S., governments at various levels have shown themselves totally incapable of effectively dealing with the spread of coronavirus throughout the population, particularly hitting populations of color for a lot of reasons.
Right.
And prisons are most certainly an area that we see folks really denied the means of sanitation, food, exercise, fresh air, and protective gear. How have you experienced the pandemic at OSP Youngstown? Do many guards and prisoners seem stricken with COVID-19, and are there any safety precautions being offered?
I'm in solitary confinement. I was already quarantined. I've been quarantined for 27 years now. I already had a mask. Because, if they sprayed mace in here, we all connected to the same ventilation system. So if a guy is sprayed down with mace in another pod, ultimately that mace will find its way to me. So we already had masks. We were already, prepared for coronavirus, basically. Nothing much has changed where I am. If from my understanding, one guard tested positive. And pretty much we've been, wearing masks openly around here now. The administration, the prison, passed out masks to each the prisoners here. But we're in a closed environment. That's what solitary confinement is. You don't have any contact with the outside world, basically. And so, if there's any advantage to being in this type of situation, you very seldom ever get sick in these places. And I'm not saying that we are not concerned. We definitely are concerned about catching the virus, because it's not so much catching it, it's about what happens to you if you do. Because the healthcare in these places, as you might imagine, it's leave a lot to, be desired, man, because, the money has been reallocated to build more prisons. The money that they have to take care of prisoners when they get sick or whatever, that money has been put in other places. So, for instance, at the prison here in Marion, Ohio, my understanding is that they have over 1,900 prisoners who have tested positive for the coronavirus. Damn near 80% of that particular prison. And from what I understand, and it's been hard to get the exact numbers, but from what I understand, 6 to 10 people have died, prisoners, and some staff. And it's my understanding, I don't know whether or not it's true or not, but I've been given to understand that they have shipped other guards into Marion because, they are running low on workers. So there again is an example of, just poor people just being thrown in the fire, man. A lot of these guards obviously don't live with the awareness that, they share something in common with the people they are guarding, because that comes down to narrative, right? Because, I used to tell myself a story when I was standing on the corner selling drugs to my community. And that's how you do those things and salve your conscience. You tell these stories. It's lies, basically. But these are just poor people. So, as I said, I used to hate these people, but, the opposite of hate is not hate. The opposite of hate is understanding. And so, I just try to keep my mind focused on that, on trying to understand what I'm caught up in, and then trying to understand, where I end and where this other shit begins, and so I can protect myself. That's what each of us are trying to do inside these places. I wear a mask, I wash my hands, and, to the point now where my hands are basically raw. Mm. I'm trying not to catch it. I'm trying to stay alive. The same thing I'm doing, by talking to you. This is all about, just trying to stay alive because I have a right to be here.
Yeah.
My life means something to me. And in as much as my life is not for these people to take, I intend to fight them. If that's by wearing a mask or writing an essay or whatever form that takes, I intend to fight them to the bitter end, man. And that's on everything.
So what do you plan on doing when you get out?
I don't think I think a lot about getting out. I'm living my life right now. Mm-hmm. Trying to be true to who I am right now. And I imagine, or at least I hope, that I could be able to continue with myself, should, I find myself on the other side of this. Because I don't particularly like to look at life as in and out, particularly when it pertains to all the things we've been talking about. I'm not the only one doing time here. We're all doing time. In the sense that we are all, kind of trapped in these dichotomies, like white, poor, whatever, gay, straight, whatever. Those are prisons, basically. When I first was thrown into this place, they only allowed us to have 4 books. And that's been one of my, major support networks in prison. Having a informative library. I tell people all the time that, my library is like my family, my extended family. Richard Wright, James Baldwin, particularly James Baldwin. So when they told us we can only have 4 books, I was really, in the pickle because, I can't, it's like, choosing between your brothers and your father, like you got to get rid of them. So, I memorized a lot of books, a lot of, main paragraphs and whatnot. And James Baldwin in particular, his book, Fire Next Time, I committed damn near that whole book to memory. And his book, more than any other books, really gave me the sense that, we are all in the same boat. We here on planet Earth. And just because these people who are in power say that, oh, you in prison, and so you must behave in this particular way because you are in prison, that's all about being in prison. That's all about being what somebody else says tell you have to be, a prisoner, an inmate. I'm a human being. And so, I would like to think that, if I'm somehow blessed with the opportunity to walk through those gates, that I will continue to be a human being. But one of the things that James Baldwin, and I wanted to share this with your listeners, first get that book, Fire Next Time. It's an awesome book. It was written, probably 40 years ago, but a lot of what he talked about in that book, especially if you're black, especially if you are a young black person in this country, a lot of it is still pertinent today. But one of the things he said was pertaining to all of us. He said, life is tragic simply because the earth turns and because the sun rises and sets. And one day for each of us, it will go down for the last time. So that's the reason why life is tragic. That no matter what we do, that tomorrow, will be Thursday, and then the day after that will be Friday. We can't stop it. And that the sun, inexorably rises and sets, and one day for each of us, over, 30,000, 40,000 people have died of coronavirus. Those people were not in prison. They was out there on the outside. So we all, kind of on death row. Because that's what this being on this planet is about. And one of the other things that James Baldwin said, he said that perhaps the whole root of our trouble, the human trouble, is that we will sacrifice all the beauty in our lives. We'll imprison ourselves in taboos and totems and churches and steeples and masks and races and armies in order to deny the fact of death, which is the only fact we have. So here I am on death row, and we having this conversation. That you are in a different situation than I am, and that I think is a misunderstanding. That your life is your life is in just as a serious situation as mine is. If you're looking at it properly, you only have a limited amount of time to do something righteous with your life. All of us do. In the fact that these people who are in power, who create definitions on, or limits on what we can become and what we can do, you have to move beyond that and understand that this is your one-shot life, and it's on you to make it mean something. And that's whether you're in prison or on the street. I'm not waiting to, some, magical day when the door is open to live my life. I'm living my life right now. I'm doing what I feel is right now. And that's the thing about it. If you want to be my comrade, if you want to be somebody, who, circulating my circle, then that's the understanding that I have about who I am. We in the same boat. That is, we on planet Earth, and it's a hell of a place to be. You got kids right now walking through deserts trying to get over to this country in the middle of the fucking ocean, man. Kids in Syria right now sleeping in mud, eating mud. So I'm not under the, the impression that I'm somehow in the worst possible situation you can be in on this planet. I don't buy it. So, that's, what I want to, I just don't want people to come at me as, woe is Keith, poor Keith, you know what I mean? This is a hell of a planet, man. It's fierce, and you have to be, strong, and you have to, uphold your convictions. You have to be, clear. You have to, be educated. You have to, arm yourself. You have to, be intelligent. And that takes a community, that takes an effort, not just that something that you just can't do by yourself. You got to build circles. With the, you have to, build communities. You have to, reach beyond yourself in order to make your life mean something. And so, so that's the, last of, our exchange together. Yeah, that's a good, good point to, leave on. Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and with the audience.
No problem.
And I wish you so much solidarity.
Yeah. Same here. And I just want to, also acknowledge the young people at RAM there in New York. They're the ones who initiated this month of solidarity. And I just want them to know that my heart goes out to them, that I'm really appreciative of them taking the time to, involve themselves in my situation. And hopefully through our exchanges, they've been able to understand that I feel the same way about them in this struggle, and that, putting our ears together, the least we can do is change ourselves. We might not be able to change this system, because these people got nuclear bombs,
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's some perspective.
But we can change ourselves, though, and that's what Viktor Frankl said. When you confronted with circumstances you cannot change, the challenge is to change yourself. And so I encourage, each and every one to, to take up that challenge, man, because that's the most important thing, to change yourself, to not be a slave, and, at the end of the day, not to be on the side of the executioners, man. Yeah. All right, my friend.
Well, thank you.
Good to talk to you, and, maybe we get the opportunity to do it again sometime.
I would love that.
All right.
This is The Final Straw, and I'm Bursa Goodness. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know. If you care to, you can send us letters at The Final Straw Radio, P.O. Box 6004, Asheville, North Carolina, 28816. This show is brought to you by Firestorm Books and Coffee. Located at 610 Haywood Road, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a worker-owned co-op in Asheville specializing in offbeat, underground, and independent literature. You can find a catalog of Firestorm's books and zines, plus a full calendar of events up at their website, firestorm.coop.